Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next installment of the Q&A show with Scott Horton. I'm Eric Schuler, and I'm going to be asking Scott some questions that you all have for him. Scott, how you doing today?
I'm doing good, Eric. How are you, man?
I'm doing well. So I'm looking forward to... A week ago, you told us you were...
I need to learn how to talk right.
I
ain't talk good, even when I'm trying hard.
That's all right. Yeah. Hey, so about a week ago, you were suspended from Twitter, and you told us that you were gonna call it quits. And so, first thing I was going to ask you, what have you been up to since then? Have you kept your promise, or what's going on?
Yeah, it's been great. I've gone actually a couple days without even checking to see if there was anything important that came in my direct messages or anything like that. And yeah, it's been really good. And so I didn't quit because I'm angry that they kicked me off, although that does kind of bother me. Like, I'm supposed to beg them that please let me have my Twitter back so I can tweet for them or whatever. I kind of don't like that. But that's not why I quit. Again, I know, but I like saying this. I quit because I really had a Twitter problem. It was taking up way too much of my time and effort. And in the scheme of things, in the time I have on this earth, how much of it was dedicated to this Twitter thing. Yeah, nah, there's got to be a limit. And it's really cost me in terms of writing and in terms of the show, and definitely in terms of getting books read, and in terms of building up the Libertarian Institute and all these other terms. So, good riddance. Now, I do have this Twitter thing, this Reddit page for the donors, but even that, I'm trying to only check it a few times a day and not spend too much time on it the way I did Twitter. And I already got 4 books read. We Meant Well by Peter Van Buren, and I finished. I'd already started. I was about almost halfway through, I guess, but I finished up Dan Ellsberg, the Doomsday Machine, and so that interview's coming up, I guess, in a week or two or something. But I already did the Peter Van Buren interview about We Meant Well. And then also I read The Hell of Good Intentions, which is the new one coming out. I got the Galleys version from Stephen Walt, the Harvard professor, realist school leader, and co-author of The Israel Lobby and U.S. Foreign Policy, the article and the book. Everybody definitely read. You want to know how they lied us into the Iraq War, man. Check that out. But anyway, it's called The Hell of Good Intentions, and if I can get him on the show soon enough, I want to tell him, man, you should change it to The Hell with Good Intentions. It would be so much better instead of. But anyway, it's an interesting book. I don't want to give it away, but it's a realist school take, which is a hell of a lot better than the liberal interventionists and the neoconservatives. That's for sure. So anyway, there's that. And then also read The Skyscraper Curse by the great Mark Thornton, and that included a bunch of articles that I've read before, a couple of articles I've read before, but all brand new stuff at the beginning of the book for sure. And I read that, and it's really great, and it's about the Austrian explanation. I don't want to say theory. That makes it sound like they're trying to figure it out or something, but the Austrian school explanation of what causes that horrible boom and bust in the economy, and how incidentally, not coincidentally, all the incentives line up during these massive inflationary bubbles for people to build, or to try to start the project anyway, to build the world record for the new tallest skyscraper in the world. And every time you hear not just that skyscrapers are being built, but the tallest skyscraper in the world is being built somewhere, then you can bet that before it's done, the market will have crashed. And it happens over and over again. And anyway, it's just great. And it's as he explains it, to be clear, he's not saying the skyscrapers caused the depressions and the recessions and the crashes. He's saying that they're caused in the first place. The building of them is caused by the same inflationary bubbles that caused the wrecks. And it really is, Eric. You know what? I guess you're some form of financial professional, not to out you too bad, but It really is right, isn't it, that among the adults out there in the world, that they really think that, well, what happens is the economy's fine, and then for some reason it's bad for a little while, and then it's fine again. And they don't see that the problem is in the big fake boom, the inflated prices by, basically caused by monetary policy rather than the growth of real wealth. And that's why it crashes, is because it's too damn high, because it's basically fiddled with. Right? And so everybody has it wrong except the Austrians. Everybody doesn't get it except the Austrians about why the economy does what it does all the time with this boom and bust and all the terrible, results of having all this monetary inflation, which is different than the price inflation on your shelf, but it's the cause of it. But anyway,
right.
So yeah, the Great
Moratorium. It's interesting too because
it's great.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it's interesting too, just because. I have been encouraged by, as right now, not to get too far off into the weeds of financial stuff, but, as the Federal Reserve has been tightening monetary policy, raising rates and whatnot, you have seen more takes of like, oh, are they going to raise it fast enough to pop the bubble? And so like you see, it sort of seems to me like that take has kind of made its way into the discourse. Not that they're going to, credit it to the Austrians of, oh, tightening monetary policy, that's going to cause the liquidation of the malinvestment. They don't say that, but there seems to be, we've been in this period of ultra low monetary policy, and when interest rates are really low, what do people do? They take out way more debt than they would if they knew like, oh, I'm going to need to pay 7% on that in a few years. Oh, I'm not building this. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
So, but I have been a little bit encouraged because I followed that news, somewhat closely, that, you just hear more takes that are in the mainstream of saying like, oh, are they tightening too fast now? Because a hike every quarter, can it keep up? So again, it's not attributed to the correct sources just yet, but at least it's gotten a little better, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well,
it's good if they're calling it a bubble. I mean, because they could be just complaining that, well, yeah, high interest rates can cause a problem without saying it'll end the smoke and mirrors that we're trying to get away with for now, And by the way, I was just reading the new David Stockman article, which is all about here's what's coming, the crash. And then what's coming after that, Donald Trump fighting like hell and blaming all of the bad guys who are involved, all the Wall Street people whose fault it is partially, that he's going to go after them at the same time that the whole state is going after him. And of course, if the crash comes before his reelection, he's toast, which is probably, I think, maybe the main reason that they're driving up rates now rather than any other thing is to make sure that it crashes on his watch in his first term. Not that I'm sticking up for the guy, but I think they hate him as much as I do, I guess. That's what for the wrong reasons, but still.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, he did appoint the guy who's in charge of the Federal Reserve, so I can't imagine, just job security wise, you want to be a team player if you want to keep that position. You don't want to be the person who, oh, I'm gonna raise rates so fast I'll crash it on you, and you don't want to be the guy who's in charge when it crashes either. Yeah, because it would get so. I'm not sure I would think that it's really motivated by that. Honestly, I think it's more of a true believer thing that they really do think the economy is every bit as good as they tell people, and they will be just as surprised and disappointed when they discover that, oh, turns out, you can't keep interest rates near zero that long and not have a problem. That's weird. Who could have said that except all of us?
Yep. Well, so there are these quotes where he was saying, let's see. I'm not sure who he's quoting here, but he has Reuters quoting him saying that I am not thrilled with the raising of interest rates. No, I'm not thrilled. I should be given some help by the Fed. Yeah. And he says, additionally, while Trump said he believes in the Fed's independence, he would continue to criticize the Fed if it continues to raise rates. So, he knows what's coming.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And of course, right before the election, he called it a big, fat, ugly bubble, but then it became his bubble. So
yeah, and he's taken way too much credit for it. He's been touting all of his stats all the time, taking ownership of the bubble, completely dropping that old talking point that, hey, I inherited a kind of shaky economy. There's some good things, but the fundamentals have some problems, right? Like he hasn't hedged at all. He's like, look at how great the Trump economy is. Which means he's going to own it completely when it crashes, too.
You guys see Dow 20,000? That was all me. Of course. Couldn't have been, anything else.
You know what?
Anyways,
in a related topic, I want to mention real quick, and I'm terrified to say this. I really am, and I think this is why I don't really cover this subject very much, and why nobody does, and that is the terror of the IRS, which is the flip side of this whole thing. The IRS, I'll just give you an example. I know a guy. He's not a political guy. He's just a regular guy. He owns a small business, and they came saying, you owe us $50,000. I always hear this. It's the same thing. Give us $50,000. Well, what are you talking about? I don't owe you $50,000. Hell, my gross was $50,000 that year, my tiny little startup business I'm running here. How could I possibly owe you $50,000 from that? And basically all the lawyers, all the accountants, everybody told him there's nothing you can do, and there's nothing we can do for you. You're done. You're toast. You just have to sign. There's nothing you can do. And so now he's a slave. As he put it, he has to pay them $1,000 a month for the rest of his life, basically, to pay this off with all the penalties and all the this and that they've added to it, plus all that he has to pay just to keep running his business anyway. It's just a small business, just a guy trying to make it in the world, and they've enslaved him. That's it. He works for them. His choice now is to either go, what? He can't go work for some big corporation because that's not going to work. He's not going to make, more or enough to pay them off. His other choice is to become a bum and say, oh, my back hurts, and get on Social Security and just say, forget it. Like, you win, I'll stop paying you, and instead I'll start collecting, because what else is he supposed to do? Otherwise, he's a slave. And here's our system. It works like this. If you succeed at all, if you make any money, then that's a crime. And you must fess up to it. There's no Fifth Amendment or anything like that. You must confess of everything that you succeed at to the penny. And then you will be fined a higher fine for the more money. They don't fine you for making not enough money. They fine you for making money. And the more you make, the more they fine you.
Yeah. And the bigger percentage they take from you.
Yeah. And if you're not a big enough company to have a whole legal department to defend you, then they're coming for you, basically. And you know what? In all my time driving a cab, I heard so many stories like this. I never did a lot of call-in radio shows. It's mostly just me ranting at you like this. But when I drove a cab, I met so many people who had their lives absolutely ruined. I remember one guy owned a lumber yard, said he had a great accountant, a great lawyer, and he always told them, do whatever you have to do. Don't find any tricky loopholes for me, man. No clever things. Just pay them. Keep me safe. That was the standing orders to his lawyer and his accountant, who were good guys and did a good job. But that didn't matter. It didn't matter. The IRS came and they just completely nailed him to the wall. They stole his business, destroyed it, fired everybody, liquidated it, closed it down, took all the money, and just, like communists, just come and just burn the thing to the ground. And, anyway, it's just like that. Happens all the time. That's our system in America. Well, this is the system that everybody is, they'll kick your ass if you don't take off your hat and put your hat over your heart. Where do they come up with that one anyway? Your hat over your heart. Like your heart, the muscle that keeps your blood pumping, the essence of who you are, the symbol for like all of your emotions for, your closest people and your faith and whatever, that you have to tribute that to these people. You've got to be kidding me, man. But I'm the kook, like, hey, Scott Horton, how come you hate government so much? Well, let me tell you about my friend, the slave, who works for the IRS for the rest of his life because he committed the crime of selling some furniture to somebody. Like, really, that's what's going on here, right? There's no contraband. Yeah. This is just going into business. It's absolutely crazy. And the only reason that I'm somewhat safe is because I'm so poor that I don't owe them anything, really. I mean, actually, they are coming for my ass right now. I'll go ahead and say it. I don't care. And, I have a lawyer who's trying to help me, and basically all he's been able to do so far is put them off. But I'm not complaining about me. That's not the point. The point is, this is our system where we allow it to be like this. And you got enough people going, yeah, because they think it's somebody else only are the ones paying and not them. It's crazy. And how could everyone in the country not be like, this is our highest priority? As soon as we're done ending the Yemen war, we are abolishing income taxation. How could it be this way? How could we tolerate this? It's absolutely crazy. It's seriously crazy. The disincentive to succeed, that's just from the base level of it, the entire way it's constructed is just madness. Seriously, it's one of those things like, you ever think that you're in the wrong dimension? Because it couldn't really be like this. Some crazy dream.
No, you're right. And so by training, I'm an accountant, and I never worked as a tax accountant because I wanted to be able to look at myself in the mirror. But I mean, granted, they're trying to protect people from the IRS. So, they're both defending and taking basically a welfare position. So it's kind of it's a weird position to be in. But yeah, I always thought of, I actually studied this stuff, and I'm terrified of, if I, round something wrong or whatever it is. But then you think of and how complex the rules are, and then this is just somebody who doesn't even specialize in this, and this is what they're supposed to do and be need to not get it wrong under pain of, fines and all sorts of terrible consequences if they do something wrong. And then, if you're going to use the tax code to try and create incentives, and this is going to be it's madness. It's really tragic. And like most things, it, preys on the poorest people more than it, rich people have a higher tax rate, but most of these things, they're hitting poor people the hardest. That's always how it works in my view.
And you notice how everybody is terrified of them. You don't see any movies. Eric Garrett at antiwar.com one time told me there's one movie where the IRS is in it and they're the bad guys. And I forgot what it was called. It was something that came out in the 70s or something. And guess what? Yeah, they destroyed those people. They destroyed them. And then that's it. No one dared make a movie about the IRS ever again, ever. No one jokes about them. Nobody talks about them. There's no radio or TV show where they're like, the IRS. Because they know they'll come after your cousin. They'll destroy everything around you. They're, God dang, man.
Well, it's interesting, too. I think, I'm not sure if it was, I think it was maybe Tom Woods' show, but he had a running thing where he would want to talk to those scammers who pretend to be IRS agents for a little while. And of course, why do they pretend to be the IRS agents? It's because that is, roughly the most terrifying call you could get, short of like a family member dying or something like that. Right. I mean, so that's how they're going to put the fear of death in you and try to make you make a horrible decision, is pretend that you are under pain of an IRS audit. It's smart on their part, right? Like, hey, you got to know your audience, but man, it's weird to laugh about that, but
you know what? The funny part is how permanent it is. This is just how it is, dude. It's going to be like this after we're both dead one day too, sooner or later. Oh yeah, that's just how it is in the American system. Jeez, really? I don't know. Yeah. It doesn't seem like it should be. I don't know.
And even if you try to move, they're still taking it. All those celebrities that wanted to, move away, the cut's still going to be given because that U.S. is one thing. Actually, they might have changed. I'm not sure. I'm speaking out of point of ignorance. I remember them talking about changing that, and I feel like it was something Rand Paul was pushing, but I'm not sure what the outcome was on that. So I'm gonna shut up now on that. Anyway, should we talk some foreign policy, Scott? What do you think?
Yeah, whatever you say, man.
All right. So we had a few different questions relating to the Iraq War, but I guess to get started on that.
Oh, you mean the 25-year war that's still going on? Oh, okay.
Yeah. I think in your terminology, this would be Iraq War II for the most part. Uh-huh. It's kind of
starting to catch on a little bit, I noticed.
Yeah. So I guess to get started on this, could you kind of talk through, this is a big question, and we can take pauses and take it however you like in pieces, but, kind of just walk through the run up to the Iraq War, maybe the key events. Obviously, I don't know if you want to start with September 11th or before that. And then also what it was like to live in America gearing up for war during 2002 and beginning of 2003.
Yeah. Well, I guess, one easy way for me to talk about it to start is I knew when I was a junior in high school, let's see, 94. Yeah. So when when I was a junior was when they first ran Jeb and Junior for governor. Jeb in Florida and Junior in Texas. And I remember talking about this in math class. It was kind of a cool school. And I remember talking about, oh, don't you see what's going on here, right? They're going to have one of these two will be a governor, which means one of them will be a second-term governor in the year 2000, which means that, the Republicans are going to throw the election in 96 and make sure that Clinton does 2 terms. That way they can have a Bush in there in 2000. And then it's so obvious. They're going back to Iraq. Because the world's greatest humiliation was that George H.W. Bush didn't get to finish his 8 years. He only did 4 before being thrown out, and Saddam was still there. And Bill Hicks joked about it, which I'm sure is what really got to them. But everybody joked about it. And all the tough guys like Paul Wolfowitz, right, who's never been in a fight in his life, said, oh, this was the big mistake. You should have gone all the way to Baghdad. Old Bush Sr., he didn't have the stones to follow through. And even to this day, people, it's just a matter of almost religious faith. Even that guy, Tom Streithorst, who I interviewed, who's got a great anti-war take these days, is still stuck on this. Yeah, I guess if they'd taken out Saddam back then, that would have been different. No. I was always wrong. And so after the Iraq, we don't have to talk all about how they got us into Iraq War I, but it wasn't, legit and honest. But after Iraq War I, basically and especially after the defeat of Senior, the idea was that one of these sons is going to avenge him. That was just obvious. And they, I didn't know what a neocon was then. To me, they were all just the Republicans. But I do remember that Bill Kristol stuck out, and that the Weekly Standard magazine I would see at the bookstores would always have Saddam on the front. And there was this kook lady named Lori Milroy who was always going around talking about how Saddam is behind all the bombings. Saddam's behind the World Trade Center. Saddam's behind, in fact, the AK-47 assassination of CIA agents at the Red Light in 1993. And behind the Oklahoma City bombing. And this is all Saddam Hussein's unfinished war with the United States. And I was a conspiracy kook at the time, but I never got caught up in the whole Iraq is behind it, because that just didn't sound right to me about, that Saddam is going to keep waging Operation Desert Storm against us, or whatever. Just obviously wasn't true. But, the Republican hawks were certainly always pushing that. And in fact, there's the famous clip of Dick Cheney from 1994 talking about, well, geez, if we had gone all the way to Baghdad, we'd have been bogged down in the capital city in urban fighting and unable to find him for who knows how long. And then the Iranians would have got the south, and the Syrians would have got the west, and the Kurds would have spun off, and that could cause a conflict with our friends, the Turks. And he's explaining exactly why not to do it, right? But why? Because he's at the AEI, and his questioner is saying, why didn't you go all the way to Baghdad? And so Cheney is being forced to defend. And so it was they were just waiting. They were just biding their time, And the fact that the Republicans ran Bob Dole in 96, who couldn't possibly have won against Bill Clinton, and probably he was the only one who couldn't. Or I don't know, Phil Gramm probably couldn't have either, but Lamar Alexander might have beat him. I don't know. But anyway, no, I'm not saying the Republicans have a very deep bench. Don't get me wrong. Yeah. But anyway, it sure looked like I was right that they threw the election in 96 to make sure that a Bush could get in there and do the war. And so it was that obvious. And then, of course, we know that, you have the clean break policy and the Project for a New American Century. So what people need to read there is the clean break. It's predominantly written by David Wormser, the important neocon, Dick Cheney's foreign policy advisor later on. And PNAC was Wolfowitz and Bill Kristol, Irving Kristol's son, and the editor of the Weekly Standard. He's really the ringleader of a lot of these groups. And so you had, all the neocon think tanks inside or outside the government who just came into the government with Cheney. And this is the group that Colin Powell, the Secretary of State, who was George Bush Sr.'s man, had said they had set up a separate government. When he talked about the Office of Special Plans under Douglas Feith in the Pentagon, he called it Feith's Gestapo office, you know, meaning that they were outside the law, that they were outside of the form of the bureaucracies, that basically Cheney was running this separate network of these neocons. And so, which was, you know, really right. That was the way Seymour Hersh talked about it too. Like you had 8 or 9 guys who hijacked the whole government. And you had, you know, about 40 or 50 who hijacked the whole media. And so, you know, the neoconservative movement is really like 100 guys or less. You know, if you include some of the Kagan's wives and whatever, you know, it's not that many people. But they were in all the right positions. And you know, Cheney put them in there and put Rumsfeld in there as well. And so to someone who didn't trust him, you know, Peter Van Buren, and I think he kind of, you know, he backpedaled in when I confronted him about, or, you know, contradicted him about it, when he was saying, to a man, the American people bought it and said we have to go to war. Well, that really just wasn't true, right? Like a lot of libertarians, I'd like to say all, but I'd be lying, but most libertarians, and certainly like virtually the entire left, including the liberals. I mean, Nancy Pelosi and the House Democrats in their majority voted against it. The Democrats in the Senate were another story. But out in the world, regular liberal folks, you know, if they were readers at all, they mostly were against it. Liberals and everyone to the left of them. Because, you know, on the face of it, it was, you know, a bunch of rich Republicans from Houston, Texas, who were, you know, all connected to these oil companies, and we're all corporatists, and we're led by Junior, the dumbass, you know, who's just Bush's son. Not that Bush was that smart, you know, but who was remembered as a bad guy and a legacy of that Reagan era and that kind of thing. And so they just had such a negative appraisal of all those people going in. They didn't know about the neocons either. They just figured this is all just a bunch of corrupt oil wealth games and what have you. And so, you know, their default was to not believe in it. But so they supported going to Afghanistan. You know, you got to go after Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. But when it came to Bush, you know, and I had a lot of regular Joes tell me that, like, hey, what's with the bait and switch? I noticed that. You know, I had a friend, I mean, and you had to know something about it, right? If you didn't know anything about it, if you didn't know that Iran was between Iraq and Afghanistan, if you didn't know the first thing about where to start learning about who's who over there, and you were just going by what they told you, then I guess you're lost, you know, if you leaned right at all. But, you know, I knew a guy who was actually a right-winger, or not really right-wing, but a conservative. But his father was a something low level, you know, or medium level at the United Nations, like some kind of bureaucratic something. But so that just meant that this guy was raised with a little bit of geography, you know, and just not any kind of expert, but just a basic understanding of who was who over there. And as soon as they started talking about Iraq, he went, wait a minute now, come on. You know, Saudi, Osama, and his Egyptian friends left over from the Afghan war, that's not Saddam Hussein. I know the difference between these characters and what they're about. And that was enough. You know, and like as I like to say on the show, all the cab drivers and bartenders knew it was bullshit, knew it was complete nonsense. You know, come on. And you know what? And it was really easy. You didn't really have to know that much about it. You just had to think critically about it at all. Well, they went straight to Afghanistan after September 11th. It took them a year and a half to start bombing Iraq. Well, if Saddam did it, how come they're waiting a year and a half? If Saddam did it, how come they're dancing around with the French and the Germans and the Chinese and the Russians asking permission on the UN Security Council to start the war? They're doing that because the law says you can't start a war unless the UN Security Council says it's okay first, and then it's fine. But so that's why they're doing it, because this isn't a matter of responding to the attack against us. You're dumb enough to believe that, but they don't try to say that to the states of the world because they're not buying that. So in order to start the war, they're having to, you know, come up with Saddam's in violation of these weapons resolutions, and that, you know, we're enforcing world law, and so you need to give us the authority to, invade that way. Well, that doesn't sound like self-defense to me. That sounds like, as Paul Wolfowitz said, the excuse that they settled on for bureaucratic reasons, because it was the ones that the lawyers told them were the best to keep them out of prison. That they were going to be able to say, and the British were the ones who really demanded this, that they were going to be able to say to the lawyers that we really had a UN resolution to enforce. Without that, they were afraid that they would be war criminals, because they were. And that was the motive for even going to the UN at all, for that matter. But anyway, a lot of people didn't buy it. And, unfortunately, I'm not going to sit here and name names about it, but it's an unfortunate part of American history that the libertarian movement and the Libertarian Party especially fell down on the job right there at that time when their leadership was so necessary. But not antiwar.com and not LouRockwell.com and not, a lot of people. Cato kept some of their good guys and not so much some of their others. And Reason was a mixed bag. And it was a dark time, man. But one thing I used to do was I would read the Austin American Statesman, and they would always run William Safire out of the New York Times. And I don't think that he was a former communist, but he was friends with all these neocons. I don't know. I don't think you'd count him like in the club. But he definitely knew all of them really well and seemed to, be totally in sync with what they were thinking. And he wrote an essay that was in probably late September of 2001, or maybe it was in October. But it was before it was just when the war was starting in Afghanistan. And he wrote an essay called The Big Mo, where Mo is short for momentum. I guess it's taken from football or something, where, when you're on a roll, keep on going. And what he was saying was, bomb Iraq right now. Start the war right now. And let the heavens fall. Let the UN, let the French scream. Let the Democrats scream. Just go ahead and do it while you have the chance, while everybody's pissed off. And let's get this thing rolling right now. And then you could just see how, I was like, wow, look at that kind of thing. Took note of it for sure. And then you could just see how the neocons were just rolling this thing out. They had their narrative and they basically just announced, like, okay, it's going to take us about 1.5 years to get all the forces in place. So between now and then, we're going to tell you every lie that we think we need to finally get you on board for this thing. And so then that was it. And they just told nonstop lies, and they demanded that everyone buy into it. And on penalty of, complete ostracism from whatever part of society you're in for daring to be outside of the consensus of the American flag, which represents starting a war with Iraq now,
Right. And do you think the reason they waited that, or they took that 1.5 years to kind of build, well, not really consensus, because as you pointed out, it's not like they had it when they went, but to sort of build support, you think that was primarily, the legal reason of trying to build up a plausible...
Yeah, it was. It was Tony Blair and Colin Powell. We're like, we could go to prison for this. The law says that you can't start a war.
Isn't that hilarious? Doesn't it just sound so quaint to say that, like, someone at that level of power, they're going to go to prison for something? Like, come on now.
Right.
I was just thinking, they actually think that?
I was just thinking about, for some reason today when I was driving down the road, I was thinking about the way Tim Robbins sent all the financial paperwork out to the newspaper about the prison warden and makes him kill himself at the end of the Shawshank Redemption, and how, why would he kill himself? All he would have to do is be like, hey, I'm a government employee. I can do whatever I want. He wouldn't be in any trouble. He could run for mayor in 2 years. Why would he shoot himself in the head? Like, what kind of fairy tale is that? A guy with magic powers who can heal you and a warden who's afraid of accountability? Not in this country.
You know what? Sometimes they like to, end those movies with an optimistic, note. I think that's what they were doing. The suspension of disbelief. That's what they needed.
Yeah.
They wanted you to buy in.
It worked on me at the time. I was like, yeah, take that, warden. But now I'm like, come on. He would have been like, so what? And they would have said, I don't know. I guess nothing. And then that would have been the end of that.
Could have had a movie with unicorns come in and like, now that's more realistic. I can buy that. Gosh. So it's a legal reason because they're worried about accountability, even though we both know it would almost zero chance it would ever possibly come. It's part of it too that, just in terms of the resource constraints of, they can't wage, going into Afghanistan and going into Iraq simultaneously, or was that less of a motivator, do you think?
No, I mean, they had a state army to fight in Iraq, so they wanted to build up all their armor in Kuwait. And, in the Downing Street memo, they talk about, and this was from July of 2002, they talk about, well, plan A is obviously, or it's option A, is the buildup in Kuwait and then the eventual just invasion from there and hopefully from Turkey as well, which didn't pan out. But then they said option B is rolling start. And we'll go ahead. Who's surprised by this? What if we dressed up an American U-2 in UN colors and had it shot down over Iraq and said, there, Saddam is in material breach of the UN resolution, and so we're going to go ahead and use that to go to war. And so they didn't do that, but that was one of the options. And listen, this memo was taken by Richard Dearlove, who was the director of the MI6, who was in a conversation with Bush and Blair. I mean, they were talking and he was standing there taking notes. But he was the director of MI6, and that was his story that he put in the Downing Street memo about what Bush had raised to Blair. And so I guess, and I have it in my book where Blair basically had to say to Bush, hey, I know everybody's really excited, but we have to go to Afghanistan first. And even talking to them like little kids, Afghanistan, Taliban, Al-Qaeda, that's what we have to do. And then I swear I'll help you attack Iraq, but not now. And made Bush promise to wait in his panic, because his lawyers were telling him, man, you could go to jail, which again, not plausible at all, but still. There could be a Chilcot inquiry years and years and years and years from now. And then you'll make millions of dollars being a, political oil consultant or whatever. Right.
That's hilarious. Yeah. And so break down the motivation. So you got Bush, Bush Jr. His, we think, is really just the personal motivation. Got to avenge, Father Dearest over there.
Or I think more like show him up. I think he was one of the ones who told his dad to go all the way to Baghdad in 91. And that
so he wants that.
Yeah, so he wanted that told you so. Yeah. That's how you get reelected. You got to be in the middle of a war so you can do a political ad with a bunch of wolves coming at the camera. Vote Bush. There's wolves coming at you. They did that for real. And it worked. And he was reelected. Sort of. I mean, mostly. But yeah, so that was him, and Karl Rove certainly was, this is how you get reelected. You don't want to change horses in midstream. Haven't you ever heard that cliche? Well, we all believe that, so that was part of it.
And then you got the Cheneyites, and that's more the clean break neocon motive.
Well, Cheney, first of all, is his own self, and so I think, more than anything, he owed the guys at Halliburton, because he was a terrible CEO. And one of the things that he had done was, I'm pretty sure it was Ingersoll Rand. I need to look this up. I keep saying this. But I'm pretty sure he bought Ingersoll Rand, which was this giant conglomerate. And they were like a week away from being found, liable and responsible for asbestos poisoning, meaning, cancer and stuff. So it was some giant settlement. And so then, that just, completely, I bet they probably didn't have to pay it eventually, but it killed their stock value or whatever, right as he was having Halliburton buy it. And so he was kind of paying them back by putting them on the Army dole, that you guys are going to get to build a bunch of big Army bases. And this is how I'll, socialize all of my failures onto the American taxpayer and use, and, this is such a great example, too, of you look at Cheney when he was at Halliburton, he gave a speech saying Clinton is irresponsible for maintaining all these sanctions on Iran. We want to do business with Iran. If they need oil pipelines, we build oil pipelines. And he did the treacherous, traitorous thing, Dick Cheney, of saying that on foreign soil, attacking America on foreign soil, attacking sanctions and saying we ought to get along with Iran because they're people and we can do business with them. But then he becomes vice president and he's a demon from hell, straight from hell. Now he has a Marine Corps for free to do whatever he wants to with it. And immediately he does whatever the hell he wants to with it. How could he possibly resist, you know?
Yeah. Who needs voluntary transactions when you can take stuff by force?
Yeah, exactly. And so, so now the neocons, I mean, some of them are just outright traitors. You know, Larry Wilkerson, who was Colin Powell's chief of staff on the show, his chief of staff, you know, who helped lie us into war at the UN speech and everything, who's now been, you know, trying to make up for it ever since by being a good anti-war guy. But he said Douglas Feith and David Wormser, those guys were traitors, man. Those guys were, you know, I mean, not guilty of treason, but they were agents of a foreign power. That was what he said. They were not just ideological, hardcore, pro-Israel, pro-Likud neocons. They were there representing the interests of Israel, like full stop. There's an anecdote of Condoleezza Rice shouting down Doug Feith at one point and saying, or not shouting him down, but saying, yeah, Doug, when we need to know what Israel thinks, we'll call whatever, Sharon, and ask him, and that kind of thing. But so, I mean, that was really, I mean, above all, to them, Israel's everything. And to the point that, you know, you can consider this an excuse for them if you want to, maybe, trying to be fair, that they, you know, many of them refuse to believe that America's interests and Israel's interests could possibly be any different. That, you know, whatever's good for them is good for us in that General Motors kind of way. Everybody knows that, and it's not even in question. And then, so what do? I mean, Michael Ledeen had the most extreme take, basically, that he was always pushing, which was faster, please. Let's turn the Middle East into a boiling cauldron. Let's overthrow everybody, especially Iran. And let's, you know, smash the Middle East and make it better. And then you always have Paul Wolfowitz there to say that, listen, the future of mankind in the 21st century is democracy, and we are going to prove that you can create democracy especially in the Middle East. And even with Marines as your tool for building one, that, you know, absolutely, we can do it because we're so exceptional and whatever. So this was kind of, you know, some of them really believed it. And, you know, for more of them, I think it was kind of cover for, you know, the president wants to do this and we want to see him do it. And, you know, Ahmed Chalabi had a huge influence here, too. He was the leader of the Exiles. And, you know, he had an office in Tehran. His headquarters really was in Tehran. And, you know, he obviously represented himself first, but the Ayatollah obviously supported his effort to convince these American Zionist, you know, neoconservative, you know, the vanguard of the Zionist movement in America, basically, that this will be good for Israel. And so now, you know, in the 1980s, when Ronald Reagan backed Iraq, Israel backed Iran. You know, that's kind of part of the history, even after the Iranian Revolution, for 10 years after the Iranian Revolution.
And wait, was that because Iran was, or they perceived Iraq as more hostile to their policies, or Saddam was stronger at the time? Yeah,
he was stronger at the time. They were more worried about him, and they still had their old friends. You know, the Ayatollah kept a lot of the old government in place when it came to intelligence guys and military guys and stuff. So they still had a lot of their same friends in power there for a long time, and their Cold War with Iran didn't really break out until the 90s. But anyway, so, you know, a big part, if you read A Clean Break, and there's a companion piece too, also by Dave Wormser, it's called Coping with Crumbling States. And this is the one that has the great phrase, expedite the chaotic collapse. Once we expedite the chaotic collapse to Syria, then that will put us in a better position to create the new future there and whatever. And so, so in one or both of those, I guess, I forget now, he talks about how basically Chalabi has convinced him that we can put a Hashemite king in there That would be, a cousin of the king of Jordan or a brother or something of the king of Jordan. And that the majority Shiites will love this, or at least they love obeying authority so much that they will go along with this and it'll be fine. And then they can even be used to, keep the Sunnis from causing too much trouble, I guess, and whatever your concern is, don't worry about it. And then at that point, we'll have such a great compliant system in Iraq doing things the way the Americans want, that will impress the people of Iran, that they want to have a pro-American government too. And then, that all the pressure is going to flow from Iraq into Iran. And David Wormser and Richard Perle and Paul Wolfowitz bought this. The AEI, American Enterprise Institute and Project for a New American Century and the Center for Security Policy and the Washington Institute for Near East Policy and the Sabin Center, the Brookings, or I don't know if it was called the Sabin Center yet, but the Brookings Institution, Pollock and O'Hanlon, all the think tank specialists. The only, quote unquote, real legit think tank in DC that opposed it was the Carnegie Endowment. I forget the lady's name, but it was kind of a half-hearted thing. She refused to go along with it, but she didn't really try to stop it. But every other think tank, basically went along, at least the ones that officially take positions. But even, the Council on Foreign Relations, I don't know if I read everything in Foreign Affairs that year, but, it was just like the Post and the Times and everything else. It was just heavily slanted toward intervention. The effort really was led by the president and the vice president. It was like, all right, let's do this, go team. And then the team was really excited to help, but it really was a top-down effort, and everyone else was basically getting in line. And, Leslie Gelb, who was the president of the Council on Foreign Relations at the time, later said, and, and this is interesting too, man. It sounds honest to me. And this is the president of the Council on Foreign Relations. And he says, the pressure is on to just go along with what everybody else says, just like in a professional sense. That this is what we're all doing. Why stick your neck out? Why risk your job and position? And what, you know what I mean? So here's a guy who has a ton of influence, who could have really led an effort to, I don't know, maybe even stop it if he was really trying. But that's the furthest thing from his mind. He's covering his own ass, and that's it. Public choice theory.
Yeah.
And so that was it. And then, but yeah, back to the fear thing, where, your uncle and your, sister-in-law, can't get along ever again now because of the giant fights over war and torture and murder and all this stuff that the Bush administration basically put them through. It was all a premeditated murder plot. It was all a conspiracy to start a war that killed 1 million people and had an incredible torture regime. Tens of thousands of people were tortured by the U.S. military there. At least thousands and thousands. Estimates legit estimates in the tens of thousands were tortured in Iraq and Afghanistan. All you hear about is the CIA waterboarded a couple of guys or whatever. It's a lot more extensive than that. The military picked up all the same rules in the way that they handled a lot of these people. And then when they got caught, they said, yeah, well, that's what you got to do. Isn't that right, American right? And the American right said, yes, sir, whatever you say, up 2, 3, 4. We're torturers now. Whereas before they weren't necessarily, you know what I mean? Like maybe if you'd asked, if you'd really put them on the spot, they would have been pro-torture in some circumstances, but no one had put them on the spot. Bush demanded that they all stand right there and support this. That, yes, you're damn right, that's who we are and what we do. Oh, but it's not torture, though. It's not torture, but yeah, it's torture because you got to torture them. And
you're either with us or with the terrorists, right, Scott?
Yeah, and they really did that. And they turned the American people against each other so bad. And that has so much to do with where we're at now with the pendulum swinging in all the dumbest ways and making everyone hate each other so much. So much of this is George Bush's fault. It really is. None of this had to happen at all. This was his project. And by the way, I left out of the coalition the oil guys. Greg Palast, I guess, has done the best work on this about the oil guys. James Baker, was the lawyer for Exxon down there in Houston. And their idea was to try to keep Iraqi oil from being developed, to keep prices high. And because there was too much of it, it was too readily accessible, and they, weren't necessarily going to be the ones counting on getting those contracts, although they do have some up in Kurdistan now, I guess, or they have. But the idea was to keep Saudi dominant over OPEC and to keep Iraq out of the game, behind the red line and off limits, for now at least. And it seems like if that's the standard, and Powell said that all along, so if that's the measure, they succeeded in that. I mean, the oil a lot of it has come to market, but compared to if they had had a stable security situation, there's no comparison. So,
which is really ironic too when you think of, kind of Trump's narrative of like, what was wrong with the Iraq war was that we didn't take the oil. And you have that whole narrative of this is all about, oil companies. And in some ways, like you're saying, it is, but it's not the way that people think about it. It's not that, oh, they're trying to take the oil and they want to secure that. Like, no. Well, if you have a war in an oil producing region, you're going to crazy reduce supply. And so you're going to drive prices up until things calm down. Yeah. And so it's kind of the flip side of what the kind of usual story is. And then there's also the other narrative that goes along with that of like, well, why does the U.S. need to be in the Middle East? And that's because, well, we got to keep oil flowing this whole time. But what are you doing by starting a war in the Middle East? You're restricting the flow of oil. That's right. What you're doing.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
It's amazing how upside down it is.
Yep. So, and now that is a big part of this is like this grand strategy too. So part of it would be they want to be able to dominate the Persian Gulf forever, to guarantee that they can get it. Sure, like you're saying, even though on paper it doesn't really work out, but at the same time, they want to be able to shut that tap off. And, particularly in the event of a war with China, they want, because China has virtually no domestic oil resources for whatever reason. There's just nothing under there. So apparently, so that's a big part of their thing. And, so I mentioned at the top of this, the Stephen Walt book, and his realist take. So his thing, it's a very professional academic type look at this kind of thing. And, very dispassionate, just kind of analysis. And talking about how, right, so we don't have to dominate the whole Middle East. There's this idea that we have to dominate that region and be the dominant power there. But that's too much. We really don't need that, right? What we need is for Iran and Saudi and Iraq to sort of balance each other. And from his point of view, if any one of them came to dominate the entire or a huge majority of the oil resources of the region, and I guess he doesn't say, but he ought to mention, and in a way that it really looks like they're trying to, corner the market and put a stranglehold on others and stuff like that, that would be the place where he would intervene. But until then, we ought to do what he calls offshore balancing. I'm not saying that. I'm saying complete non-intervention. But he's just saying, what's the opposite of we have to dominate this region? Saddam's in our way of dominance. The Ayatollah's in our way of dominance, especially now that we got rid of Saddam for him. Damn, that didn't work out the way Chalabi told David Wormser it would. And so, now we got to double down on all these same mistakes. Maybe we should help support the rise of Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State in Syria in order to check Iran by getting rid of Assad. And then, hey, look, it's helping kind of hem in the Iraqi government and their Iranian friends a little bit. And so maybe we're a little bit happy to see that. And then, oops, it turns into an outright Islamo-fascist caliphate with this guy Baghdadi on the balcony and bad PR ops. And so now we got to reverse all that, make them even more powerful, and just keep going on. And Stephen Walt is saying, look, man, he's saying, yes, we do have to guarantee global access to those oil supplies. Like it or not, yes, we do have to do that. But do we have to do any of the rest of this in order to do that? No. All we have to do is sit, at Diego Garcia and make sure that Saddam doesn't take over it all. Well, that's not a problem anymore. And Iran is not about to invade Saudi or any kind of crazy thing. So just, you know what I mean? It's unnecessary, even assuming the basic prerogatives of enforcing America's national interests. You still don't have to be onshore shooting people and getting shot. None of this was necessary. And, think about the level of lie that is to the soldiers who killed people and died over there. Believing that, hey, I'm defending my country. I'm doing what my government says must be done to keep Americans safe. But it wasn't that. It was to deploy this so-called grand strategy, which wasn't grand. It's just crazy and stupid and based on a bunch of lies that a bunch of exiles told a bunch of pro-Israel traitors in D.C. to believe. And I'm not blaming Iran. I'm blaming the neocons. I'm not blaming Chalabi. I'm blaming the guys who believed him and did this.
Right.
I'm not trying to diminish their responsibility by saying, yeah, poor little David Wormser believed what he was told. He certainly signed up to do so.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, these guys completely ruined everything. And then, I kind of am critical of Stephen Walt because he's not nearly as radical as me. But on the other hand, he just set such a perfect kind of example of you could be, an American foreign policy grand strategist with a, serious and legitimate Harvard-based plan for how things should be and not have any of this going on. Oh, and accept, as I say, accepting the doctrine of we have some national interests, as he puts it, keeping any one power from dominating Europe, any one power from dominating the Middle East, or any one power from dominating East Asia, Northeast Asia. He says that at those points, we got to intervene. But the best way to intervene is by not intervening. The best thing that we could do in almost all these cases is back off. Otherwise, we don't have to. Look at the Grand Chessboard by Zbigniew Brzezinski and what nonsense that is. That America, it's nonsense. That America has to dominate Central Asia. We do not have to dominate Central Asia. It makes no difference at all whether we dominate Central Asia. Whether China, Pakistan, and the Pashtun Afghans rule Afghanistan, or whether Iran, Russia, India, and their, Tajik and Uzbek and Hazara allies rule their areas or whatever, makes no difference to Americans whatsoever. Other than it'll be a shame to see the backlash when we finally leave from all the phony structures we've erected that cannot stand on their own. It's going to be ugly, but so we'll be sad about that, what our government has done to those people. But in terms of America, a threat to Americans and whether we have freedom to live our life or not, it's just not true. And I'm not really sure why I'm supposed to care if China dominates Japan or vice versa, other than I wouldn't want to see war break out anywhere. But in terms of how that affects how I live in North America, that's not altogether clear to me. I mean, certainly not over the long term. But anyway.
And so his plan is, with respect to the Middle East specifically, basically, have the U.S. Navy in the general vicinity. And if somebody tries to make a power grab that's trying to
he doesn't even
that
say
whole
that
region.
Specifically. I mean, he just says offshore balancing.
Right.
So, the idea is, I guess there are ships nearby, but they don't even really need to be, right?
Yeah.
They could be offshore of the USA, pointed out and doing nothing.
But just that they're kind of waiting and ready. We could intervene if anything goes on here, but we all...
Right. And, he even says that was always the policy. The policy was never non-interventionism. The policy was always, for example, in the world wars. When it seemed like one side was winning, we intervene, which is really not right about the First World War.
Right.
But maybe it is right that House and Wilson thought so. Mm-hmm. That... they didn't want to see any one power, especially the Germans, dominate all of Europe. And so, but only late in both did they enter the war to tip the balance in the favor they wanted. So here's the thing too, is I was really thinking a lot about this while I'm reading this book, because a big part of his whole take is that all of these foreign policy professionals mean well. They're all a bunch of good guys. They're all a bunch of decent people, and they all have grand strategies too, like he has a grand strategy. And in his grand strategy, it seems like he really only ever wants to kill people as an absolute last resort. Whereas to these other people, they figure that sometimes you just start wars to make things the way that you want them to be, and this is acceptable. And so, and then the idea is, though, that, so where lies evil in here? Is it just in the banality? Because it's a lot easier for me to say, no, Richard Perle is the Prince of Darkness. That's what they call him. I didn't name him that. They call him that because he's a sick, evil, horrible murderer of a bastard who, of course, would never, dare to pick up a knife and go fight himself somewhere, pick up a gun and go take point on some patrol. Was perfectly happy to start wars and see other people die. And see, I'm so glad that I said Richard Perle, because that reminded me of a thing that I even wrote it down so I wouldn't forget, and then I did anyway. But then I remembered again. And that is that half a year into the war, a year later, James Risen ran a piece in the New York Times about how Richard Perle had met with Saddam Hussein's representative, a very powerful Iraqi businessman or minister, whatever it was, in London. So this would have been about 6 months before the war started. And this guy completely surrendered on behalf of Saddam Hussein. He said, and this will go to tell you what liars these horrible people were who pushed us into this war. Saddam didn't even know what they were mad about. So the way that the offer came was, look, man, whatever it is that you're mad about, I'll do whatever you want. If you're really concerned about that old nuclear program or any chemical weapons, you can send in the army. This is real. Send in the army, send in the CIA, send in the FBI, and let them look around and do whatever they want. Forget the UN inspectors. Send your best guys, and you can have everything. You can go anywhere. Then he said, if this is about oil, you can have it, man. We can discuss mineral rights. Whatever you got, we know your guys from back in the 80s when we were friends. We'll talk again. We'll work this out. We'll do an oil thing. He said, if this is about Israel, I swear to God, I will stop funding Hamas, which was, the scandal was, and I think this was really part of the neocons' motivation too. It drove them crazy. And this is something that, regular American, soon-to-be infantry wouldn't know or care that much about, really. And that was that Saddam paid kind of an insurance policy type payment to the family of any Palestinian who died in conflict with the Israelis, very broadly defined, and that included suicide bombers. He would pay their families. And so, not that there were that many, there was a Hamas suicide bombing campaign in the Second Intifada, but it wasn't this ongoing extensive thing after that. I mean, I guess there were a few, but seriously a few, not dozens and dozens and dozens or scores or hundreds or anything like that. It wasn't like this ongoing massive thing, but he did that. And so that was one of the things that they absolutely hated about him too. And so he's, I'll totally knock off all of that stuff. And he said, if this is really about democracy, Saddam Hussein sent his government say this. If this is really about democracy, we'll hold elections. Free and fair elections. We'll have, other powers come in and monitor the things. And I really don't want to fight you guys. And, it came out later from his military interrogator said, and there were other, testimonies from other people inside the highest levels of his government. He was basically retired at that point. He was writing a romance novel. He had his ministers running the government. He didn't think war was going to come because he knew he hadn't done anything. He thought George Bush was just BSing around. He had told his men, and I love this because you always hear this, well, Saddam was pretending he had weapons of mass destruction, to look tough in front of the Iranians. Oh, really, huh? Well, that's funny because actually he gave up a 12,000-page dossier to the UN called, I'm not guilty, I didn't do anything, I swear. Here's everything. That was the official title of it. No, but close. And it was 12,000 pages
Rough
about here's
translation.
all Reagan ever bought us from the French and how we shot it all at the Iranians like he asked us to. And it's all gone. Y'all blew up the change after Iraq War I, and that's it. And listen, you could even find to this day the Fox News headline where they admit it against interest that turns out Iraq made no weapons of mass destruction after 1991. None. And you know what? Let me say this too, and I'll say it real fast. There's a famous New York Times article that got sent around all over the place. And, everybody's right-wing uncle forwarded this. And it was, oh, my God, look, see, they did find weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, all these chemical weapons. And George Bush was right, although, geez, we don't know why he didn't say so. And all you stupid hippies were wrong, and so therefore the war was justified and all this. But if you actually read the article itself, it says, no, dummy, you're wrong. That's not right at all. It says that what they found, and what in some cases sickened American GIs who found them, were old duds left over in the desert. They had nothing to do with weapons of mass destruction program activities, as George Bush would try to claim. They had nothing to do with anything. They were all leftover junk from the Ronald Reagan era, when Saddam Hussein worked for the U.S., when Saddam Hussein committed all of his worst crimes, the Anfal campaign against the Kurds and the war against Iran, was when he was America's guy. And all those weapons were from that era. Reagan and Bush Sr. bought them for him, and it was the British and the French and I think the Germans, I forget now, who supplied the weapons to him. And then, so most of them, as I said, were, actually shot at the Iranians or the Kurds, mostly the Iranians during the war. There was a bunker called Camisea that American GIs blew up after Iraq War I that got a lot of them sick. But then whatever was left they talk about in this New York Times article, if you go through, there's like 7 important paragraphs that explain the context of this, that none of this has anything to do with what George W. Bush claimed was that Saddam had an active nuclear weapons program, that he had an active chemical and biological weapons program, mobile biological weapons laboratories that could drive all around out in the desert where you can't find them and make secret germs for germ warfare. Remote-controlled drones that can fly across the Atlantic Ocean and spray the East Coast. Get duct tape and plastic to protect your house because Saddam is going to help Osama fly remote-controlled planes from Mesopotamia. Don't break out your atlas. Just believe me, okay? And then, it's like people have atlases.
Yeah.
But anyway. It
was a long time ago. They might have had them.
Yeah, and then warehouses full of sarin, VX, mustard gas, all of this stuff. It's all there. We know it's there. Chalabi says so, and so it's on. And
you didn't finish the Perle quote.
Yeah. You're right. In the Perle story, so the guy surrendered on everything. Thank you. The guy surrendered on everything on Saddam's behalf, and Richard Perle told him, "Tell Saddam we'll see you in Baghdad." And that was like 6 months before the war started. And, they had at the time, they had Naji Sabri was one, and they had a guy named Habush was the second. And they were both CIA informants inside the highest levels of the Saddam Hussein government who verified time and again, top to bottom, we have nothing. We're not friends with Osama. We're not helping Al-Qaeda in any way. And we have no weapons. We got rid of it all. And, I talked on the show to Scott Ritter back before, he was finally really disgraced. Where, and I interviewed him numerous times about this. And he talked about he was the famous weapons inspector in the 1990s. And he talked about how the UN, that Saddam had actually lied and had kept some mustard gas after the initial end of Iraq War I. In 1991, and he tried to get away with it, but he got caught. They caught him. The UN caught him, or maybe the Americans caught him, and then that was it. And they destroyed all the rest of it, and it was all destroyed by the end of 1991, and that the UN weapons inspectors and the CIA and all the rest of them knew it for a fact by 1995, that it was all gone. And so, as Ray McGovern, who's, now we know him so well, he's, such a good friend and all this stuff. But back then he was, nobody really knew who he was, but he was leading this group, Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, and saying, now, pardon, some of us have actually, didn't just start becoming interested in foreign policy on September 12th, but, knows a little something about this. And if Saddam has all these weapons, where the hell did he get them? Because we know he didn't make them. Because we know what he has. We know what his factory's ability to make this stuff is left over from then, and it's nada. All that stuff was dismantled. So you're lying. And in fact, right around now is the anniversary of the Dick Cheney speech at the Veterans of Foreign Wars, where Dick Cheney has the audacity to go to the Veterans of Foreign Wars, and who are the guys who, overall, generally speaking, are the ones sending their sons and their grandsons off to fight in this one for him. And he's lying right to their face. Saddam, we fear we have reason to believe, we have intelligence that says that he has reconstituted his nuclear weapons capability. He's making nuclear weapons. He may already have some. And he has all this stuff. And Ray McGovern has told the story about how he heard that and he was like, oh man, you're such a liar. I know that's not true. Anybody who knew a CIA guy knew that wasn't true. But, that was the party line. That was it. And they pushed it. I'm not trying to acquit the CIA because they were behind the aluminum tubes lie, their WinPack group. And they vetted all the, they tortured a bunch of Iraq Al-Qaeda lies out of innocent people and put that in the Colin Powell speech. They had a lot of bad stuff there. But, they weren't quite bad enough. And so at the Pentagon, I talked about before, Feith's Gestapo office, the Office of Special Plans. And there you had Abram Shulsky and Michael Rubin and Michael Ledeen and all of these cranks in there churning out, basically picking through the CIA's trash and taking, jotting down exiles' claims and pretending that this was all intelligence about weapons of mass destruction. And then they had, it was Michael Maloof and I guess Feith himself across the hall had a separate group that was the Counter Policy Terrorism Evaluation Group. Like the words were all out of order for some reason. I don't know. But it was supposed to be the Counterterrorism Policy Evaluation Group. And in there they, came up with all the, helpful additional lies about Saddam and Osama and their relationship. But eventually that mostly came down to the claims of Sheikh al-Libi and Abu Zubaydah, both of whom were tortured by the CIA into making claims about Iraq.
Right. Yeah, I want to go back to the Richard Perle offer or the Saddam offer to Richard Perle. At the time, is it that offer wasn't communicated broader than him, or do we know so we know he rejected it because he had his reasons, but I remember hearing the Goldman interview you had recently that was, it was mostly about Russia and part of it was about Israel. But one piece that he said that kind of stuck with me from that was that, he really thought that a lot of the neocons were essentially true believers and that they really did think of, American power as a force for good and the ability to create democracy and this sort of thing. And so, when you hear that and then you think of them offering, we'll have free and fair elections, we'll give you oil. It sounds like you could cross off a lot of boxes on the, neocon true believer checklist if that's really their interest. So do we understand how was it just, Perle cut it off at that point, or the whole government was already in motion and so you already have the momentum and can't stop the train? Or do we know more about that?
Well, so first of all, the article is, as I said, the fall of 2003, November 2003, the struggle for Iraq. Iraq said to have tried to reach last-minute deal to avert war. And in there, it's James Risen, and he talks with Perle in the article. And Perle says, I was dubious that this would work, but I agreed to talk to people in Washington. Mr. Perle said he sought authorization from CIA to meet with the guy in the first place. They told him they didn't want to pursue this channel, and they already had separate contacts. Mr. Perle's, it's Perle's quote to Risen. The message was, tell them we'll see them in Baghdad. Man, I remember the first time I read that too. Oh, God. These bastards.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting how, sanitized the language is. When they say we'll see them in Baghdad, that means we are going to drop tons of explosives on a lot of people that are got nothing to do with any of this.
Right.
And it's like, it's like, oh, we're grabbing coffee in Baghdad. No. You're murdering a bunch of people and turning an entire country upside down. That's what you mean.
Yep.
But you don't have the balls to say it.
Yeah, of course, Richard Perle wouldn't be, 1,000 miles from there.
Oh,
well,
sure. Of course
500
not.
anyway. I guess you can find him in Cairo from time to time or something. Tel Aviv.
Yeah. Gosh. It's unbelievable.
But yeah, so listen, there's a thingamajig I did on Twitter one day, and Dan Sanchez made a Medium thingy out of it, and it got reposted here or there. I don't know, man. But you can find it if you search my name, and 16 articles. Scott Horton, 16 articles about how they lied us into Iraq. And I have a lot of really great stuff for you to read there about the neocons and how they did this. And then I have no idea why this never clicked in my head. It's like on a parallel set of neurons that never talk to each other or something. But of course, one of the most important of these would be The Israel Lobby and U.S. Foreign Policy by Stephen Walt and John Mearsheimer, which, again, they're not as radical as me, but boy, are they good at doing scholarly stuff. And it's a great take. And they have a lot. And as they put it, the war probably couldn't have happened without the neocons. And they are really the Israel Lobby. They're the vanguard movement of the Israel Lobby, The ones who get the deputy assistant secretary job and then get it done.
Right. Well, and I think you also did, we could also put a link up to, I think you did an interview on Tom Woods' show where you kind of walked through a lot of this material.
Oh, that's
as well.
true. Yeah, if you search my name and Tom Woods' name in Iraq, there's a couple that are sort of the same, but I think there's one or two that are kind of different on this too.
Okay. Yeah, well, and
yeah.
For any of the other, we'll probably wrap it up there because I know we always try to keep it shorter to make sure we don't, people still want to listen the whole time, but
right.
We're not successful, and that's okay. We didn't get to all the questions in the Reddit group, so folks in there, if you're listening, we will get to them.
Oh, the Khobar Towers. That was Al Qaeda. It's in my book. I got the footnotes, and Warren Christopher said so, and Gareth Porter says so, and Michael Scheuer, I think before he completely sprang a leak, said so. But I will say that the lady, God, I just had her name on the tip of my tongue.
Cynthia Storr.
Cynthia Storr. Thanks. See, Eric, Cynthia Storr, the CIA lady that I talked to about, what did we talk about? We talked about Sebastian Gorka, but we talked about how many, at the beginning of the interview, we talked about how many Al-Qaeda were in Afghanistan. She's my footnote. She's the first footnote in my book for that. 400 Al-Qaeda guys with Osama in Afghanistan at the time of 9/11. But anyway, she said that, well, it's true that Al-Qaeda did the Khobar Towers, but it also is true that Iranian-backed Saudi Hezbollah did it, that they both did it together. And you know what? I don't know, man. And then I says, oh, yeah, well, so tell me about it. And she says, I can't. It's a secret, So, okay, well, I don't believe that. I guess, whatever. It could be, but it does. It's still, I guess, even if that's true, it doesn't ruin my narrative, which is, think of how important it might have been for people to realize that it was Osama bin Laden, the Saudi radical, who keeps saying, get your airmen off my peninsula, that had bombed the building full of airmen. Now, that was never told. By blaming Iran almost entirely, consider her like coming back my way a little bit on that. But by blaming Iran at the time, publicly, that completely deprived the American people of access to a very simple and important narrative, which is, are you sure we really need to stay in Saudi? Right. Maybe we don't. Maybe we just lost 19 guys and now we're realizing that, well, this is a friendly state. It's not like we've invaded and this is our beachhead. This is a friendly country. We whoop Saddam's ass. They don't need us to protect him anymore. We can go back to offshore balancing now. We could have had that conversation if they hadn't lied about or told only that side of the story, if it's true, that it was Iranian-backed Saudi Hezbollah that did it, which just is like pouring mud in clear water, you know? So I don't know, man. That's my take on that. But read Gareth Porter because he's the man.
Yeah. Sounds good. Well, Scott, do you have anything else to say before we, wrap up for this week?
Yeah, just sorry, everybody, that I didn't get to all of your stuff.
That's all right.
But
fair
you
to
know
give
how I
a
am
long answer
with the
and a good
talking
answer.
and all of that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we'll definitely keep the list in mind for next week, and we'll keep on working through them.
All right,
Thanks
good deal,
again for
man.
everybody for submitting things.
Yeah, dude.
Yeah.
Well, good to talk to you as always, Eric. Thanks a lot for doing this with me, man.
Yeah, sounds good. We'll see you next week.
See you guys. Oh, yeah, and also support all my sponsors and stuff. They're all at scotthorton.org, and they include the War State book by Mike Swanson, and also No Dev, No Ops, No IT, which is a great book about how to run your tech business like a libertarian. I read it, and it's good, and I don't even run a tech business, but I am a libertarian. And it's really good. No Dev, No Ops, No IT. And then also Kesslin Runs, which is this new dystopian novel by Charles Featherstone. Remember him? Friend of the show, used to live in Saudi and knows all kinds of stuff. Oh, he's a Christian minister. And so he's all educated on all the kind of end time Zionism and all that kind of cool stuff too. Anyway, he wrote this great dystopian novel, Kesslin Runs, by Charles Featherstone. You can find that on Amazon.com. And then I said The War State by Mike Swanson, but he also does investment advice at wallstreetwindow.com. He's smart. It's good stuff. I read those emails. I really do. I really should interview him about that stuff more often and, learn more. But it is really good stuff. Sign up at The War State. Nope, that's the book. Sign up at wallstreetwindow.com. And then, so thebumpersticker.com. Of course, used to be my company and still supports the show after all this time. Rick McGinnis over there does great work at thebumpersticker.com for your band or your business or whatever you want, custom stuff. Check him out at thebumpersticker.com. And Robertson Roberts Brokerage Inc. If you're a libertarian, then that means you're into metals. So you buy your metals from this guy. These guys. And they've been in business for longer than I've been alive, too. And they do great work, and they charge a very low premium. And if you buy your precious metals in Bitcoin, there's no service charge. Because I guess they're bullish on Bitcoin. So check them out at rrbi.co. rrbi.co. And so now I'm panicking a little bit, thinking of who I'm not thinking of.
Tom Woods Liberty Classroom.
Yeah. Tom Woods Liberty Classroom. That's a good one. Commission-based type thing. And my book, Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan. And you can get the audio book, too. So, yeah.
And
anybody else?
Zencash, too, right?
Oh, here. Oh, Zencash. Jeez. You know what? Man, I need to call them, too. Zensystem.io or Zencash.com. It's not just a digital currency, see. It's also a very secure messaging system and document transfer system as well. Check out all about that. And it's unlike, I don't know all the technical details really, but it's unlike some of these more open blockchains. It's like a top secret blockchain that it's proven, and yet at the same time, everything's hidden as to who's doing what and what everything is in some kind of ones and zeros sort of way. But you can learn all about it at zensystem.io or zencash.com there. And so, yeah. Oh, and if you need a new website, expanddesigns.com/Scott, and they will hook you up and save you $500 if you go to expanddesigns.com/Scott. So I should say that too. All right. That's good. So now, thanks again, Eric.
Yeah, no problem. See you next week.